14 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over Week 7 from the Big Ten in football, and then we'll go over the schedules of Rutgers and Michigan and talk about the top 25 releasing today. So, Joe, we're going to start with where we started our Week 7 preview, and that is with the big three teams in the Big Ten. We're going to group this together because they all kind of go together, because they all had games that didn't mean a whole lot in the end. Number 2 Michigan beats Indiana 52-7. Number 3 Ohio State beats Purdue 41-7, and number 6 Penn State beats UMass 63-0. So Joe, anything to take away from these three games other than job done? Here we go.
For Michigan, I'll start off with them. Them and Ohio State unfortunately played at the same time, so Michigan and Ohio State fans like to watch each other. Regardless, Michigan started off about as bad as you can. We're actually trailing at the end of the first quarter. The funniest part of all of that, it was McCulley, the old Indiana quarterback, converted to a receiver who threw the lone TD pass in that game, which kind of speaks for Indiana's offense and quarterback situation. I do know they fired their offensive coordinator, and they had interim play caller this game. But, getting off Indiana, it was really just not even close after that. Michigan converted the third down to Colston Loveland, and from there, Indiana could not get any momentum in their passing defense. They did get to J.J. McCarthy a few times, so a few positives for the Hoosiers there, but it was kind of a sleepwalking performance from Michigan in terms of their first half. Second half turned it on, and what's funny is I say sleepwalking. They were up 31-7 at the break. It still felt like Michigan was hiding stuff. They were just running their typical plays. They did throw one flea flicker. That was about the only unique thing they did, but definitely felt like a tuned-up week. They do have Michigan State this coming week, so look for them to open up the playbook as much as they will so far this year. Certainly they're going to save something for Penn State and Ohio State later on in the year. But Sean, Ohio State, kind of the same deal. Really redeemed themselves. Unlike Michigan, they really did not play well in their last game. And their offense looked in sync. McCord looked great. Obviously, I think getting Emeka Egbuka back is going to be huge for this coming week against Penn State. So, business as usual for both those teams. Kyle McCord looks more and more comfortable back there. I guess one thing to highlight, this has been a concern for Ohio State the past 2.5, really three seasons. They cannot find a healthy running back in October. Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams, even Tradham getting hurt in that game. They had to give it to Dallin Hayden. Now, Dallin Hayden is a fine back and would start on most teams in the Big Ten, but, I don't know if that's something they could. Obviously, you can't control injuries, but that's a bit of a concern for me for Ohio State. We'll talk a lot more about their concerns heading into our next episode when we preview the matchup with Penn State. And lastly, Penn State. I don't think anyone actually watched this game. Drew Aller just dominated. It was Don Brown getting destroyed by Penn State and James Franklin all over again. Something Michigan fans and Big Ten fans are way too familiar with. But to be fair to him, he had a UMass roster as opposed to a Michigan roster. So Sean didn't learn way too much about any of those teams. The goal for all three of those teams was to win, pull the starters early, and get out healthy, because this is the first real rivalry weekend, the Big Ten season. So definitely a lot to look forward to for those fan bases and for the conference at large, but kind of just barely an appetizer, if you ask me.
The three other games that featured Big Ten teams, Joe, all pretty well contested, good games. We'll start with Rutgers and Michigan State. Rutgers beats the Spartans 27-24 at home, but they did trail by 18 after the third quarter. Michigan State led 24-6. Joey, last week we talked about how Rutgers, when they're going right, they can run the ball, they can eat clock, and we were worried if they dug themselves a hole, whether they could go and win a game, and they did here. Down 18, 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. They really kind of came out of nowhere to take this one.
Yeah, Sean, I think let's start with the first half. First thing, I'm going to be very positive toward Caden Hauser. I thought he played a fine game, his first career start. obviously Rutgers wasn't the hostile environment. It was supposed to be. It was raining, windy. Uh, if you looked at the stands, they were probably as well attended as the NJ regional or state title game played in Piscataway. But getting off that, Hauser, he's a lot more mobile than Noah Kim. He threw some nice balls. However, he was definitely restricted to throwing balls under 10 yards. Looked really comfortable in the first half. And one thing I have to call out, and I'm not going to make a huge conspiracy about officiating, but Rutgers definitely had some unfavorable calls go against them. Greg Schiano, I thought, was going to rock bottom the referee on at least three occasions on some of the pass interferences called. Beyond that, it was a game marred by bad weather in the first half, ton of fumbles. There was one play where Michigan State fumbled the ball. Then Rutgers threw a pick the next play. So it really looked like a terrible game in the first half. And then Michigan State going up 24-6. Everyone thought that was lights out. But it was funny. I was reading Michigan State, a lot of their journalists and their insiders. Once they fumbled that punt to start the fourth quarter, it kind of felt like the floodgates were about to open. And I'm not even going to blame the defense or offense. I think you could really blame special teams and coaching, especially was when Rutgers got up to 24-21 and they kicked that to Terrell Henry. Obviously, he should have fielded the ball, but someone has to tell them that Greg Schiano was one of the best special teams minds in the game, and something like that is going to be up their sleeves, especially in a tight game, in a must-win game for Rutgers at home. So gonna go to the positives for Rutgers now. Kyle Monungai, that end drive where they led the last 7.5 minutes was a thing of beauty. Ran the ball. It really felt like Michigan State's defense, who I thought actually played a pretty decent game, but when all was said and done, they were just too tired. That's what Rutgers wants to do to teams. They want to be in the 24-17 kind of games and run the ball and beat them and beat you at the end, running down the clock. And that was the Schiano masterpiece, the whole fourth quarter, which really got them a mulligan for the first three quarters because they were as bad as they looked. But Rutgers, biggest game of the year for them is against Indiana. That could get them to bowl eligibility. And then Michigan State Super Bowl is this Saturday in prime time for that terrible NBC song. So stay tuned for that.
The second game we'll go to here is Illinois and Maryland. Maryland, they were 13.5 point favorites at home, Joe, but Illinois goes in there and gets a 27-24 win. Certainly unexpected, solid performance from the Fighting Illini after a year of kind of not meeting expectations, but they go in there and they do it. And is there anything else to talk about here other than it's really disappointing for Maryland to drop this game?
Well, I'm going to say two things. A lot of people are blaming Talia Tagovailoa. I think he played a lot better than he did against Ohio State. He was a lot more conservative. That's what killed him in the Ohio State games, turning the ball over. His stat line did not impress you, but I thought he was a very smart quarterback. I just think the play calling was atrocious. I think the key part of the game was when Maryland was down three, but they were down 24-21. Third and six, they ran the ball. Nowhere in Maryland's identity is running the ball on third and six. Absolutely not. With the great receivers and great quarterback they have, you air it out. It's kind of like what the Giants did last night. You die with your best play. Clearly, the Giants had to run and Maryland had to pass, but it's the same principle. Um, as for Illinois, credits to Luke Altmaier, credits to Brett Bielema. They really seem like a team just waiting for the season to end. And, perhaps they're definitely not going to win the West, but perhaps they could get to a bowl game. The Big Ten West is, as we'll talk about in our next recap, is one of these divisions where any team on a given day can win in an interdivision matchup. So really good for Illinois. A theme I've seen a lot of is it was classic Schiano in terms of special teams, running the ball at the end, and out toughing, for lack of a better term, your opponent. And it was classic Bielema. They didn't really they took a 10-point lead, but it felt like they had control of the game, Sean, even when the lead was 10 or less. They just controlled the ball. Maryland never had a real rhythm offensively. The play callers seem confused. I'm sure they're going to have a lot of internal debate in College Park about, going forward about play calling and all that. And that's what Brett Bielema is so good at. So good on Illinois. Maryland, to be honest, Sean, this could be a loss that could send them into a tailspin. So good for them. They do have a bye week upcoming, so Maryland has a lot to figure out. So
And the final game we'll go to here, Joe, is the Big Ten West showdown between Iowa and Wisconsin. Iowa wins 15-6 at Wisconsin. I was really impressed with Iowa here today. They only had one touchdown, the only touchdown of the game. That was LaShawn Williams, and he was the difference maker in this one. But Wisconsin, this game could be very, very easily confused with last night's Sunday night football game between the Bills and the Giants, a super defensive battle where it would come down to a play here and there. Iowa turns over Wisconsin twice. Iowa doesn't turn the ball over at all. And despite getting 332 yards, the Badgers could only manage 2 field goals. So, Joe, we said Wisconsin should have won this game. I still think they probably should have. But now the Big Ten West is as wide open as it's ever going to get.
Well, Sean, I'm going to object to the last statement. I think you were on a roll, but I think Iowa kind of has the West in I'm not going to say a stranglehold because they can't score, but they're really in the driver's seat. And
They definitely
I think
are.
the worst part of this game, Sean, was Tanner Mordecai breaking his hand. It does not look like he will be back for the rest of the regular season. I do hope he gets well soon. I feel absolutely terrible for that guy. They bring in the mid-state transfer Braden Locke. He was unable to pass the ball more than 10 yards. Braylon Allen, a decently solid game, 18 carries for 87 yards. But Sean, Iowa kind of just played their game. They got a big play on offense, and you know they absolutely strangled Wisconsin on defense. Wisconsin, it kind of felt like if this was if you're looking for the stereotypical Big Ten West game to decide the division, this was it. So if you really like defense and special teams and I'm sorry, this was just not an entertaining game for most college football fans. But if you love Torrey Taylor, he did have one heck of a game. Do watch the Journey feature on him from last year. He's really amazing as a punter. But with that said, Sean, Wisconsin, as crazy as this sounds, I think it's year one for Luke Fickell. There's big picture wise, this means nothing in a grand scheme of things, but I'll put it this way: it's just announced today that their game against Ohio State on the 28th is going to be a night game. In terms of winning the Big Ten West, you have to win that game. Now, on a greater scheme, to have a successful year one and to build as a program, they do not have to beat the number 3 team in the country, who's going to be a double-digit favorite. But in terms of winning the West, now you do. So, I don't even want to say really good on Iowa. Eric All did get injured too. I think this was a game where Iowa won, but both teams sustained heavy losses with Mordecai, Eric All, and certainly the entire Big Ten West. Any team on a given day can win. So
Iowa is back in the top 25. They take the 24th spot. And, Joe, if you look ahead at their schedule, they should be favored in all of their games the rest of the way. So you don't want to look too far ahead, especially when it comes to this Iowa team, because how great their defense is, if you don't score, you can lose any game. You could throw a pick six or a punt. Something crazy could happen, and if you're not building yourself a big enough lead, stuff happens. But they should be favored in every game the rest of the way. So if they can just be even an okay offense, I think they're a top 15 team in the country, because Wisconsin has run it through everybody that they've played this year for the most part, and they really didn't do that today. So that was a testament to how well Iowa was prepared, and a 9-point win on the road. I was very impressed with them. So that's all we have for you today. On the football side, we'll be back in 2 days to preview Week 8, which is probably going to be the biggest preview that we've done so far because of, we actually have some really high-quality games going on. Joe, we're going to switch to basketball now. Today, the AP released their top 25, 3 weeks out from tip-off, and 3 Big Ten teams were in the top 25. Purdue, number 3, Michigan State, number 4, and Illinois, number 25, with Wisconsin, Maryland, and Indiana receiving votes. Joe, any major surprises here other than just 3 teams being in the top 25?
yeah, besides the obvious 3 being in there, Sean, not really. I think Michigan State and Purdue could have been anywhere in the top 4, whether it was 1 to 4, and most college basketball fans would not have objected. So, um, with those rankings, bring very high expectations for both those teams. They've known that the whole offseason. So I don't think this changes much in either of those locker rooms. And really, it's just on them on November 6th when they tip off to deal with those.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that Illinois did get that last spot. I figured maybe one of the Big Ten teams would get in, and then the other ones would be receiving votes. But really, after the 16th or 17th team, there's going to be a whole lot of teams shuffling in and out of the end of the top 25. At least what it looks like. So, Joe, we've got two schedules this week. We are going to start with Rutgers. Steve Peichel is back another year. They're number 56 in Bart Torvik, as the viewers can see. Their preseason efficiency rankings, number 140 in offense and number 10 in defense. So the analytics see Rutgers basketball being very similar to what they've been in the past. Look at their roster here, Joe. Couple names. They return Amori, Andre Hyatt, Mawat Mag, whose injury kind of derailed their season last year, Derek Simpson, maybe a sophomore leap. They get Noah Fernandez from UMass, and then a couple other role players. What do you think we should expect from Rutgers this year?
I would just say more of the same. I think their 3-point shooting definitely needs to get a lot better. That clearly it's kind of like Wisconsin, where uh, having a some semblance of an offense and bench offense is not going to hurt you. But beyond that shot, I think Steve Peichel's kind of figured out the Big Ten, not in terms of dominating it, but in terms of doing enough to usually make the tournament, or at very worst, like last year, be right in it right till the end. So
Yeah, they really should have made the tournament last year. But at the end of the day, they were the first team out. We're going to scroll down to their schedule here. It's not the right one. Hold on. All right, we are scrolling down to their schedule here. They start off with Princeton and Boston University and Bryant. And we're going to have to cut off the Georgetown game, too, to fit all of them in. But so they have Georgetown. Then they have their Big Ten game against Illinois there in December. Wake Forest and Seton Hall on the road. And then Mississippi State on a neutral. They at least have a couple of opportunities, Joe, to get some quality wins here in the non-conference.
yeah, Sean, with those four teams you mentioned, and maybe you say three because we don't know what Georgetown is going to be in their first year under Cooley. Those are games that I actually kind of like their non-conference scheduling approach. Those are all realistically winnable games. Like if they won three of those four, even four of those four, that would not surprise anyone. But it's also not at the point where that's going to be a costly loss. I think at worst, that'd be a quad two loss for some of them. Um,
Yeah, they're all,
so
none of them are at home. Maybe Georgetown if they really, really fall off, but the other three definitely not.
yeah, and as a college basketball fan, you gotta love their away game or their whatever they play Seton Hall. So I think that's a decently solid schedule. Certainly, the team we'll preview next has a lot hot, more treacherous of a non-conference schedule. But Sean, going into their conference schedule, after the New Year's break, it kind of fires at them right away. It's a theme we've seen over and over. Away Ohio State, away Iowa, home Indiana, who they have dominated at home, and then away to Michigan State. Sean, those could be 3 of 4 losses, and really 4 of 4 if things go really bad.
Yeah, I would say, looking at this, that game where they host Indiana is going to be a game that they really need to win, because especially if they drop those first two, because you're looking, if there's a 4-game losing streak, that's where it's going to be. And Rutgers can play with anybody, they'll defend with anybody, but you just have to have a solid season from beginning to end if you're Rutgers, because I don't really see them winning like 8 in a row or something like that. There's just too many teams that are better than them in the Big Ten, and Rutgers' defense does the job some days, but when you're not as good of a team as the other team, you're not going to win more than half the time. So they're going to have to battle this year, Rutgers, if they want to get back to the tournament. They certainly got the guys that can do it, but Joe, this is a good but tough non-conference schedule, as I think we can agree upon. And then, not that any Big Ten slate is easy, but they are getting it right off the bat, and they might be able to. They might be putting themselves in an early hole, which is not good for a team that is going to be right around the bubble. So
Yeah,
look,
and for our
yeah,
listeners
go
on
ahead.
Spotify, I'll just put it this way: of the 20 conference games they have, only five are not in bowl, meaning that they're not quad one games. So they have 15 quad one games as it stands as we preview this today. So those are 15 games they have a realistic chance of losing, and some they're certainly going to be favored to lose, like especially when they play away at Purdue. So I think ultimately they'll be fine. But it's really about when they play those three bowl games, like especially when they go away to Michigan, away to Maryland, home to Wisconsin. It's about defending home court. Quite frankly, the RAC's such a advantage. They might have to go 8-2 or 9-1 at home, Sean, to build themselves some room come March.
Yeah, I don't think that's a terribly like that's within reach. Teams win their home games in the
Mm-hmm.
Big Ten, even the teams that are in the middle of the pack. They've had some really awesome wins there over the years against some teams that were some of the best in the country. So that's definitely where it starts. And then you take whatever you can get on the road. You're not, maybe the Minnesota game you're supposed to win on the road, but they might not be favored in another road game because they don't play Penn State on the road. And those are the only two teams that are really down there. But it's going to be more of the same from Rutgers. You just hope that they're able to. Their rotation's going to be real thin early on. You just hope that they can withstand the toughness of like 33, 34 game season. So Joe, we'll go a couple spots down to your Michigan Wolverines. Juwan Howard is listed as the coach here. He's going through some health issues, so we're not entirely sure if he'll be on the sidelines. But we'll go to the roster. Doug McDaniel returns. Terrence Williams, Terrace Reed all return. They do get Olivier Nkamwa from Tennessee, Trey Jackson from Seton Hall. As a team that missed the tournament last year, Joe, you lost two players to the NBA and your best player to number one, Kansas. Where do you think the expectations should be at for Michigan this time around?
Well, Sean, it's not that the expectations are fair at Michigan as someone who's been a lifetime fan and alumnus. It's what they are is what they are. So with this team, Sean, stylistically, it's going to be a whole different team you see. The past three seasons, they've played through Hunter Dickinson. They've had a lot more NBA talent, I'd say, with Caleb Houston and Musa Diabate the year before, and then obviously Kobe Buffkin and Jet last year. This year, it's kind of like a team of misfit toys, and we've seen that theme, especially with Maryland last year. It's worked out well, and it's certainly there are even more examples where it hasn't worked out. I think the key player on this team that we have to highlight is Namari Burnett. He was a five-star recruit. Michigan was after him very hard in 2020 when he ended up committing to Texas Tech, transferred to Alabama, and then finally is back at Michigan. Namari Burnett has capability to score. We've seen it in spurts when he was at Alabama. He did start the year, ended up on the bench. So I think guys like that, Namari Burnett, Trey Jackson, and Olivier Kamwa. Kamwa has certainly showed bigger spurts than the other two. It's what mainly talking about his 27-point performance against Duke, the one most of the country saw. So, Sean, I think they need a guy to pop, whether that's one of these three transfers, Doug McDaniel. I think Terrence Williams might not have to pop, but I think he needs to return to his sophomore yourself because his junior year he took a big step back. But Sean, let's get to their schedule.
Yeah, in Kamala, you mentioned his big game, but at Tennessee, they played 12 players, and it was a different guy every night. So can Kamala be the guy who averages 14 a game and plays 38 minutes? And, I think maybe, certainly sometimes, but that's going to be the key for me. Who's going to be the best player on this Michigan team? And because you have to find one. You have to give somebody the ball down the stretch because a lot of Big Ten games are close. So, Joe, I think this is all the games here it's fitting on. You start off with Asheville and Youngstown, but of the notable games here, you got St. John's on the road, Memphis, neutral, Oregon on the road, and Florida on a neutral later in December. This is a tough schedule for Michigan, but it comes with some real opportunities to put yourself in a good spot come January.
Yeah, Sean, I think for us especially the game away to St. John's at Madison Square Garden. I don't care if you're a Big Ten fan. I know we have some Big East fans listening. That's a game if you love college basketball on a Monday night at 6:30. Rick Pitino's debut in Madison Square Garden. I mean, come on, a November college basketball game doesn't get much better than that. But getting off the emotional side of things, they do go to Maui, so they have Memphis have an opportunity to play Stanford and Arkansas in the game after, no matter the result. Um, Unlike Rutgers, this is a really, really hard non-conference schedule. Michigan's certainly better have learned their lesson about losing to Central. Again, 80th time I've said it, I know, smack me through the camera. But, you know, those games you just cannot lose. That's what really did Michigan last year. I know they had the late game collapses, but it really started as a result of that Central Michigan loss in late December. So, Sean, really, really good non-conference schedule, as you said. It's not even plenty of opportunities. There's plenty of games where it's not going to cost you. If you lose away to St. John's by 40, no one's ultimately going to penalize you come March. But Michigan does have to get off to a hot start. They have home Indiana and away to Iowa for their 2 December games. Quite frankly, Sean, they have to win at least one of those 2 games. And I think the better opportunity is Tuesday night, which is unfortunately a Peacock game against Indiana. I think that's probably as must win as it gets. You need to start at least with one conference win. And the problem with Michigan last year is they didn't get one quad one win until after January. So there are at least 7 opportunities the New Year's before New Year's Day where you could get a quad one win. So Sean, what more do you have to say about their pre-January stretch?
Just say, like, you see all the bold in the non-conference there, and that doesn't include games 2 and 3 in Hawaii. But St. John's are a good team, but they're not like some elite team that's going to run through the Big East. They haven't made the tournament in forever. Just because Rick's on the sideline doesn't mean they're immediately a national championship contender. I think you'll have a chance in that one. Soriano's really good for St. John's, but other than that, they have a lot of mid-major guards that were awesome at the mid-major level, but that's certainly a game you can go in and win. Memphis is a team that doesn't have to deal with Houston anymore. And then you've got an Oregon team on the road that's not in the top 25, and Arkansas is. So if you do beat Memphis, you'll play a top 25 team. So you're going to get a lot of good games in the non-conference, but I don't think any of those teams will be in the top 25. So they're certainly like very winnable games. But Joe, we'll go to the conference schedule here, and that 7-game stretch at the end of February sticks out. All that red. Next to the bold name, that is going to be brutal for Michigan. But it does come that if you need to play yourself in the tournament, there's certainly a chance to.
Absolutely, Sean. That's why I mentioned that they need these wins before January because this stretch, let me read it to you, and I'm going to include the other 2 games. Away to Michigan State on a Tuesday night, home to Rutgers, home Wisconsin, away Nebraska, away Illinois, home to Michigan State, away Northwestern, home Purdue, away Rutgers, away Ohio State. That is brutal. I think Michigan, they had 4 quad one wins last year, and they were barely out of the tournament. This is a team that, frankly, before that stretch needs to get 4 quad one wins because the expectation is this team's going to be flirting in and out of the tournament come February. So with that stretch, if you win 1 or 2 of those games, let's say if that 7-game stretch in all bold, you go 2-5. Those 5 losses aren't going to hurt you, but those 2 wins certainly could make all the difference in the world when especially we already have a few more quad one wins in hand. And I think the Big Ten, we'll talk about this even more later on. It's going to be really tight this year. So you could perhaps see Michigan start off with a really good conference record. And then after that away game at Michigan State, they might fluctuate from anywhere from 3 to 10 in the conference.
Yeah, you just don't want to be going into that stretch needing like 6 of the 8 or something because, that's probably not going to happen. But if you go in a good spot, a couple games over 500 in the conference, then you win a couple of them, and there you go. You're in the dance. But I go back and forth on this, whether you want to have tough games late or not. And I really think it depends on how the early ones go. But that's it for our schedule, Joe. We're just under 30 minutes here, so we've got 5 or so minutes for some questions.
All right, Sean, this is immediate basketball question from Dylan, who's a Hoosier. Hoosier Dylan's been one of our best listeners and question askers, so thanks again, Dylan. Dylan asks, Sean, Should Indiana fans be outraged that Indiana was left out of the top 25? And what does that say about the country's expectations for our Hoosiers?
I certainly didn't expect them to be in the top 25. They're receiving votes, which is, I would have guessed that. They've just got a lot of players that have never played together before, so there's definitely 25 better teams as of now. But, a good win against they've got UConn and Kansas in the non-conference, so one of those wins and then will be in there. But these mean nothing. We should look at that at the end of the year, and one of the teams that didn't even receive votes is going to be a 4 seed in the tournament, and then, one of these teams that might be in the top 25 at one point was terrible. Ohio State was in the top 25 last year in the beginning of the year. So it's just good to see what people think of your team. It doesn't really mean anything other than what people outside your program think is going to happen.
Absolutely. Rex with another basketball question. I like how these are mainly basketball dominated. It shows we cover football decently well, or at least we talk too much about it. From Rex, Sean, besides Michigan State and Purdue, is there any team with top 10 potential in the Big Ten? Okay, I like that question.
I don't think so. Maybe for a stretch, but in terms of being a team up there for the whole season, I don't think so. I mean, a team could get hot, maybe sneak into the top 10, but not for the entire season. I really don't think so. We've got a lot of known commodities here in the Big Ten this year, other than the two, of course, that are in there. Be shocked if either of them drop out of the top 10 at some point, but I could be proven wrong, but I don't really think so. We have some teams that could get maybe the 12 to 15 range, but I don't see any getting close to the top 2.
Absolutely. And Sean, we're going to end our final questions from Mikey, who has a Seton Hall Pirates thing. Certainly love our Big East listeners. Thanks for tuning in, learning more about Big Ten country. From Mikey, there was such a small margin between the 10th and third best team, and really second best team, actually, in the Big Ten record-wise last year. What do you think that discrepancy is this year? So I guess the games back or the difference of games. Sean, what do you think as of October 13th? This was DM'd on Friday.
It'd be a real shock if it was as crazy on the last day as it was last year. I mean, IU was playing Michigan, and if they had lost, they could have been in the 8-9 game. And if they won, they could have been the 2 seed. Now, they did win in overtime, but Northwestern also beat Rutgers, so Northwestern was the 2 and Indiana was the 3. I don't think we'll ever see that again. That is pretty crazy. Over a 20-game season that 4 of the 14 teams were locked in with 1 game to play. It will be close again, and but that was pretty unique, I think. Just with so many teams being not very good, or not, I wouldn't say not very good, like good teams, but not elite. And this year we think we have 2 elite teams, and 2 really poor teams, so I think that should bridge it a little bit more. But who knows? That was pretty cool as a Big Ten fan for every game to have such a huge impact on the Big Ten tournament. I don't think we'll see anything like that again.
Yeah, and I'll just end with this before Sean wraps us up. It's kind of the famous Nick Saban quote. It's, the NFL would like every team in Week 18 to be 8-8 in the last week of the season because every fan base is drawn in. The reporters would talk about it. I think besides the ratings, the excitement would be through the roof. So that same approach was last year the Big Ten. Even Michigan and Rutgers, who had ultimately disappointing seasons, they were locked in until the very, very end of the regular season. I was certainly screaming and yelling during that last Indiana game, even though it was probably what put us in the grave of making the tournament. But Sean, let's end the show.
Yep, we'll be back on Wednesday for our Week 8 preview and a couple more schedules. I think there's 4 more teams. I'm not entirely sure. Once we do that, we will dedicate a whole episode to a Big Ten preview. That'll be its own thing, over an hour. But thank you for tuning in. Check out Jersey Kings if you haven't already. The code is up on the screen. It's code SportsDaily for the listeners. The link will be in the description. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.